It was bound to happen eventually, working late night after night. I knew I'd end up missing that last late subway train home. And that's exactly what happened last Thursday. I was so focused on finishing the report for my boss that I didn't even realize how late it had gotten. By the time I powered down my computer and grabbed my things, it was past midnight. Rushing to the subway station, I heard the rumble of the last train just pulling out. Great! Now I'd have to wait over an hour for the first train in the morning. I went down to the empty platform, my footsteps echoing in the silence. A paper coffee cup skittered by in the breeze, the fluorescent lights flickering eerily. Across the tracks, the feeble glow of a vending machine was the only light beyond a few scattered bulbs overhead. I checked my phone, no service. Not surprising this far underground. Sitting on the wooden bench, I pulled my coat tighter against the damp chill. A rat darted along tracks littered with gravel and trash. The whole place had a gloomy, forgotten feel this late at night. I was starting to doze off when a pair of headlights appeared in the tunnel. The train must have been delayed. It lumbered closer, a welcome sight in the darkness. As it pulled into the station, I saw only a handful of sleepy passengers inside the car. I stepped in and took the first open seat as the doors creaked closed. The train groaned and shook into motion, its rhythm lulling me into drowsiness. As we entered the long tunnel out of the station, I started drifting off. Suddenly, the train brakes shrieked, jolting me awake as we ground to a halt halfway down the tunnel. The car went dark, lights dying except for a few flickers from overhead bulbs. A collective murmur of confusion spread through the passengers. The intercom crackled to life. The conductor said someone had triggered the emergency stop and they were working to get it reset. We waited in the flickering shadows for several minutes with no sign of movement. The stuffy car was silent except for the distant echo of dripping water. People shifted uneasily in their seats, checking phones that had no signal. A woman across from me broke the tension with a laugh, saying it was like we were in some cheesy horror movie. The emergency lights cast an eerie glow on the riders' faces as we all sat wondering how long this delay would last. After 15 agonizing minutes in the still train, the silence was pierced by a blood-curdling scream erupting from the front of the car, near the conductor's booth. We all turned to look as a middle-aged man came stumbling out of the closed booth, face pale with shock and babbling incoherently. When he regained some composure, he told us the conductor was gone. The booth was empty except for a half-eaten sandwich sitting next to the unoccupied controls. According to the man, the conductor had been there a minute ago before some kind of struggle happened in the booth, after which he simply vanished into thin air. The passengers shifted about nervously. A petite blonde woman with glasses took charge, saying she was going to check the next car for help. I stood and volunteered to go with her. We stepped through the connector door into the adjacent car. It too was empty and dark, but no sign of the conductor. As we walked forward, the train heaved and shook beneath our feet for several seconds. A loud grinding of metal echoed from the tunnel walls. My fellow passengers shot me a frightened look that definitely didn't feel like normal movement for a stopped train. We crept slowly forward, the emergency lights casting dancing shadows down the aisle. Straining our eyes into the darkness, we saw nothing unusual. The train groaned again, like it was under pressure from outside. I felt along the wall for an emergency phone or switch, but found nothing. We were considering turning back when a new sound froze us in place. A raspy cackling echoed through the air, quiet at first, but then louder and more unhinged. The awful laughter permeated the train, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. We exchanged panicked glances at a loss to explain the bizarre noise. The seconds dragged on, the chilling laughter rising and falling randomly all around us. Fighting our fear, we ran back to the first car and told the others what we had heard. Passengers shifted about, muttering nervously about what could be out there in the dark. A bespectacled older man stood up, his voice quivering as he told us he had heard stories about these old tunnels being haunted ever since they were first dug decades ago. According to urban legends, he said, some workers had died in freak cave-ins and equipment malfunctions while excavating the tunnels. He always dismissed the stories as fiction, but now wondered if we were trapped with some malevolent being, the vengeful spirit of a worker killed tragically in the unfinished tunnel. The passengers exchanged uneasy looks in the dim emergency lights as the old man spoke. Just then, another blood-curdling shriek pierced the quiet, seeming to come from somewhere in the walls themselves. My heart pounded as the wailing grew louder, drowning out the murmurs of fear and disbelief around me. But just as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped, leaving only the hum of the idling train. The bespectacled man broke the silence, his voice now tinged with shame. He said there was more to the stories. Ancient burial sites full of native bones were disturbed and destroyed during tunnel construction. He told us his great-grandfather helped build these tunnels, unearthing remains and artifacts considered worthless at the time. It was said curses were placed on any who interfered with the dead. Efforts had been made to return the stolen items and bones to local tribes, but the man wondered if destructive harm had already been done, unleashing dark forces of retribution that haunt the tunnels to this day. As he finished his chilling tale, the popping sound of sparking electricity filled the air. The few working emergency lights left in our train car suddenly winked out, casting us into total darkness. The passengers cried out in fear and dismay. I stood paralyzed, blind in the pitch-black car. Then faintly, a pinpoint of light appeared at the far end of the car. It slowly grew larger and brighter, illuminating the interior with an unearthly bluish-green glow. All eyes were drawn to the light, which began to morph into a human shape. The ghostly figure formed vaguely into the silhouette of a large man dressed in antiquated overalls and a mining cap. He stood wavering at the end of the car, glowing brighter. A collective gasp arose from the passengers around me. After a long pause, the figure spoke in an angry, raspy voice that seemed to originate from deep underground. "Leave now, trespassers!" Screams rang out as the ghostly miner vanished, plunging us again into terrified darkness. A young red-haired woman began sobbing, terrified by what we had witnessed. Around her neck I spotted a pendant engraved with the native bear symbol. I remembered legends of animal spirits protecting sacred sites. Perhaps this entity sensed she was marked with their magic. The train car abruptly lurched into motion, slowly picking up speed and rumbling forward down the tunnel. The old man bellowed, "We must escape. This train will deliver us unto evil." I peered out the scratched windows, but there was only blackness whipping by outside. Up ahead, a faint light appeared. An abandoned station emerged from the dark, one I had never seen before. Strange ancient symbols marked the crumbling platform. As the train slowed toward it, the old man wrenched open the doors. He pleaded for us to trust him, saying this was our only chance at escaping the haunted tunnel. Many riders froze in terrified indecision. But urged by the old man's desperate warnings, I and a few others leapt onto the empty platform just before the train gained speed again and vanished into the dark. The remaining passengers huddled in the rubble-strewn station, asking what we should do next. Amidst the crumbling pillars and debris, I spotted a worn service ladder descending into a lower tunnel. Pointing it out, I said it was our best hope for finding another way out. The others reluctantly agreed. With the old man's guidance, we descended cautiously into the nondescript maintenance passage, away from the phantom platform. As we felt our way through the gloom, a young man with torn clothes and wild eyes came staggering out of the darkness towards us. In the dim light, I recognized him as the red-haired woman's fellow passenger who had comforted her on the train. She cried out his name, Mike. He looked right through her with a strange grin, babbling about joining the others down in the buried spaces below. Before we could stop him, he scurried back into the tunnel on all fours like a possessed animal. Despite our warnings, the young woman insisted on going after him. As she vanished into the dark passage, the old man yelled that we must keep moving if we hoped to elude the evil inhabiting this cursed place. With heavy hearts, the remaining few of us continued down the musty maintenance tunnel. We walked for what felt like miles, the claustrophobic air pressing down on us. Strange scraping sounds and faint shrieks echoed all around. At last we came upon another rusted ladder ascending up into faint light. Climbing it with trembling legs, we emerged one by one onto an empty subway platform very similar to the one we started from. But something felt off. The signs were all jumbled numbers and letters. No phone service or living soul in sight. We roamed the deserted station, searching fruitlessly for an exit or answers. But there was only an ominous stillness, the dusty turnstiles and flickering fluorescent lights offering few clues. With no options left, we descended another maintenance ladder, hoping this labyrinth of connected tunnels might finally deliver us back to the surface. The passages down there branched and split endlessly. Ancient carvings dotted the walls, seeming to shift shape in the wavering glow of our flashlights. We were hopelessly lost. Then a distant rumble approached, and a solitary subway train roared past, its horn blaring and spectral lights flashing. In a split second of crumbling self-control, I ran after it. My heart pounded as I heard my name called out behind me, pleading for me not to leave the group. But I couldn't turn back. This train was likely my only way out of this living nightmare. I jumped into the last car just as it accelerated. Inside, the moldy interior was lit by flickering bulbs adorning the arched ceiling. Strange robed figures stood motionless, filling the aisles. I froze. Their heads turned in unison toward me, eyeless faces gaping beneath dark hoods. I cried out, but no sound left my lips. Moving backwards, I felt my legs turn to jelly, feet leaden as if mired in quicksand. The ghastly figures whispered in tongues unknown as they glided towards me, their putrid stench filling my nose and mouth, choking off my breath. I tried to scream, but only muted, wheezing gasps came out. The robed nightmares were all around me now in a tightening circle. As their bony fingers caressed my skin, everything began to fade into a whirl of shapeless shadows. A final glimpse of greenish light and twisted faces flashed before my eyes as the darkness took me into its cruel embrace. I jolted awake with a choking gasp. Early sunlight streamed onto my face. I was lying on a bench in the subway station where this whole ordeal had started. Commuters walked briskly past as a train arrived with the familiar whoosh of rubber wheels on rails. I sat breathing heavily, unable to believe I escaped the subterranean house of horrors. Was it all just a twisted nightmare? I rode a train home in the morning sunlight, grateful to be free from that dark, endless maze below the city. Only after a hot shower and several hours of fitful sleep was I able to fully process what I had experienced. I contemplated telling the authorities, warning them, but who would believe such a surreal account? Maybe it was best left buried. Over the next few days, I couldn't escape the gnawing feeling of being watched. At home, at the office, the prickly sensation of eyes tracking my every move lurked at the edge of my perception. The screech and rumble of subway trains made me break into a cold sweat. Each time I swatted away the paranoid feeling that I was not alone. Light sleep was punctuated by nightmares of robed phantoms pursuing me through damp tunnels I could not escape. A week after my unexplained ordeal, I returned to work late after avoiding the subway. The office was mostly dark, just a few fellow employees finishing up projects. As I passed by my boss's office, the door creaked open on its own. I froze. Inside, a baleful greenish light seeped out around an indistinct shadowy figure hovering behind the desk. An awful familiar voice rasped my name from that glowing specter. I blinked and stumbled backwards. Just like that, the door was shut. The office entrance showed no signs of light or activity within. My heart pounded out of my chest. I could avoid it no longer. The vengeful entity from those haunted tunnels now stalked me even on the surface. Perhaps I had been marked for bringing unspeakable ancient evils up into the waking world. There would be no escape from its wrathful torment. I resigned the next day with little explanation. Sleep became increasingly elusive, replaced by longer and more vivid nightmares of being trapped below. Strange figures hovered at the corner of my sight at all hours. I stopped leaving my apartment except when absolutely necessary. A constant state of dread became my new normal. Friends suggested I get psychiatric help or move out of the city altogether. But I knew any effort to flee was futile. The subway entity had followed me home, and it was only a matter of time before it completed the malevolent task it started. One long sleepless night, my breaking point finally came. A screeching phantom train materialized impossibly on the wall of my bedroom. The robed figures poured out, floating towards me with arms outstretched. I did nothing to resist as their icy claws gripped me tight and dragged me into their cursed embrace. I felt myself merging into their putrid forms as my humanity melted away. As we sunk back into the spirit realm together to roam those caverns for eternity, one thought alone brought me some semblance of peace. At least now I would be part of the haunting instead of the haunted.